Virtual Legality is a YouTube video series with audio podcast versions presented as commentary and for education and entertainment purposes only. It does not constitute legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. If you have legal questions about the topics discussed, please consult your own legal counsel. Honestly, you don't want to be taking generic legal advice from a YouTube channel or podcast in any event. On with the show. PSA, Spider-Man's MCU future is still very much up in the air. Hello and welcome to another episode of Virtual Legality. I'm your host, Richard Hoeg, managing partner of the Hoeg Law business law firm of Northville, Michigan. And today I think we have a very, very short episode of Virtual Legality for you. But I saw something on my social media feeds that relates to Disney and D23 and all the things we've been talking about in respect of the gigantic Disney-Sony Spider-Man tiff, and I just really have a problem with how it's been presented. So let's take a look at what our friends at IGN tweeted out today. And I suspect you will see this if you're in other social media atmospheres, if you're on Facebook, if you're in Instagram, wherever it is that you might be seeing news and you care about this, you care about Spider-Man and the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the MCU, you're probably going to see this interview and video set, this package, that was done with Kevin Feige and Tom Holland for Entertainment Weekly, described like IGN did here. So let's take a look at this tweet. It says, breaking. This is 3 hours ago. Tom Holland and Kevin Feige confirm that Spider-Man will not, capital letters on not, return to the MCU. That is a definitive statement. That is a statement made as if one or both of Tom Holland and Kevin Feige, maybe other executives at Sony and Disney, actually said, this is over. Both sides are not talking about this anymore. Spider-Man is done in the MCU, and we're moving him over to Sony. And I think it's important. We're going to look at what IGN actually wrote. We're going to look at what their headlines are. We're going to read a little bit from the Entertainment Weekly article. I think it's important to know how people actually use social media, how they actually read articles, how they go through what they see in their news feeds, and how important the actual headline is, how important the tweet is. This tweet, as you can see right now, 3 hours after it was put up, has 9,000 retweets, has 25,000 likes. This bit of quote-unquote news that Spider-Man will not return to the MCU has been distributed all across Twitter for however many millions of impressions at this point in time because of how big IGN is. And it's a real dereliction of duty in terms of what they said. I know, it's easy enough to say, hey, Rick, it's a clickbait headline. This happens all the time. And I think it does. But if I can make any one small step in virtual legality to at least have people say, let's click through, let's look at the sourcing, because that seems pretty definitive. I listened to that virtual legality episode that Rick did earlier this week on Sony and everything else, and I think that that might be maybe not exactly the full story. You can see my somewhat snarky reply to the IGN tweet below. Spoiler alert, no, they didn't, because I actually went through, I read their interview package, I looked at the Entertainment Weekly video, and I actually read what IGN wrote. Now, we're pulling this up 3 hours after the fact. I don't know whether their headline at the time actually said exactly what their tweet said. I just don't know. But what their headline says right now is Tom Holland and Kevin Feige on Spider-Man's future after Marvel-Sony talks collapse. Basically saying, hey, they're going to discuss what the future might be. And they've got a subheading here, we told the story we wanted to tell, which is marginally definitive. You can certainly get the impression that right now, certain folks involved in this story think maybe that the negotiations have cooled. But this is not the same kind of definitive headline that IGN actually went out to Twitter with. So perhaps this is what the journalist wanted, this is what the editorial staff wanted, and somebody else is running their Twitter, or perhaps this actual title changed and this was updated. I don't know. But their article says Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige and Spider-Man star Tom Holland addressed this week's Sony-Marvel breakup, which will see the wall crawler leave the Marvel Cinematic Universe in a new interview conducted at Disney's D23 Expo on Saturday. If you're not familiar, D23 is like Celebration or like SDCC. It's a big convention for people that are fans of Disney. And the quotes here are from the Entertainment Weekly article, so we're actually going to go look at the source. But suffice it to say, this IGN article basically just quotes these things that are in the Entertainment Weekly interviews and says, for more on the Sony-Marvel breakup, look at these other articles we did. So nowhere in these quotes does it say that they're definitely not having Spider-Man in the MCU. Nowhere does it say everything is broken down and it will never, ever happen again. What it does imply is that these folks, Tom Holland and Kevin Feige, essentially now Tom representing Sony, Kevin representing Disney, are looking at it and saying, we don't control these corporations. We don't control these massive, massive conglomerates. So to the extent we're hearing what you're hearing and our agents are hearing what you're hearing, yeah, that's the state of play right this second. And that's exactly what we said in Virtual Legality earlier this week. There's no reason to believe that the Deadline leaks and the Variety leaks and everything else aren't accurate. Certainly there's a tiff right now between Sony and Disney, whether Disney should get 5% gross, whether it should have some split of the financing. We saw another leak after I did my video to Variety suggest that Sony came back to the table and offered something like 25% or 30%, which would be an absolutely normal, reasonable counteroffer to a 50% request, and Disney didn't abide by it. But what you see in respect of those articles is that these corporations are now essentially fighting this battle in the public eye. That you have various anonymous sources leaking on the one hand to Deadline and saying Sony didn't try anything at all, and another source leaking to Variety and saying Sony came back with a perfectly reasonable counteroffer. It's those evil Disney folks that didn't come back to the table, trying to set the goodwill towards their company or away from it, depending on who's doing the leaking and who they're talking to. This is maybe not normal, but it's not so vastly unusual that a lot of these journalists in these various industries should be struggling to keep up with what's happening. Unfortunately, because the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Spider-Man are so popular, you have a lot of people opining on these things, whether it's the IGN Twitter manager, whether it's anybody else that will say that this video package and these interviews say it's over and done for good, that you don't have people following along with what's actually being done at these corporations and what's being said here, what the goal of an interview package like this is. So again, we've talked about messaging in Virtual Legality. We talked about this specific tiff in Virtual Legality. So we know, Tom Holland in all other aspects is a brand into himself, like every actor is. So he has to look at it and say, I want to look good. I want to make my fans know that I appreciate Spider-Man. I love Spider-Man. I love being Spider-Man. And that basically all of this is outside my control. Kevin Feige, maybe a little more unbelievably, has to deliver a similar message where he says, look, these big things are outside my control, and I otherwise love Spider-Man. I love the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and if you're scared about Disney without Spider-Man, don't worry. I'm going to try to still the rocking boats. And if we look at these interview answers, that's what happened. So we've got this Entertainment Weekly exclusive that says Tom Holland opens up about Spider-Man's future in the wake of Disney-Sony rift. Tom Holland is opening up about Spider-Man's future in the Marvel Cinematic Universe following the news that Disney and Sony have failed to reach a deal on new films. Holland stopped by people in EW's studio backstage at Disney's D23, where he addressed the news that Disney has no plans to include Spider-Man in future MCU films. Here's what Tom Holland said. This is Spider-Man. He's under contract with Sony. So you put all those perspectives in the back of your head. Basically, we've made 5 great movies, Holland told EW. It's been 5 amazing years. I've had the time of my life. Who knows what the future holds? But all I know is that I'm going to continue playing Spider-Man, yes, because he's under contract to do so, and having the time of my life. It's going to be so fun, however we choose to do it. The future for Spider-Man will be different, but it will be equally as awesome and amazing, and we'll find new ways to make it even cooler. Who knows what the future holds? That certainly isn't the statement that someone at IGN or anywhere else you might see on social media could have meant to mean that Spider-Man definitely won't be in the MCU, right? Could it? Who knows what the future holds? Basically, Tom isn't making these decisions. Tom is an actor. He's a well-paid actor. Actors are well-paid. He's a popular actor. But he's not making decisions for Sony's contracting. He's not making decisions for Disney. I have no doubt in my mind that these 5 amazing years in which he has been a part of the MCU, he would like to continue, but it's out of his hands. And all he knows is that he's Spider-Man, and an actor has to say what they need to say in order to keep that goodwill, to keep people liking them, and that's exactly what you would expect. This is a normal statement. Who knows what the future holds? You can see what I can see, which is that obviously something is happening between Sony and Disney. Earlier this week, going back to the article, news broke that Disney would be ending its partnership with Sony Pictures on the Spider-Man franchise thanks to a disagreement over co-financing. Sony owns the film rights to the iconic superhero, and several years ago, the studios struck a deal. Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige would help produce Sony's solo Spider-Man films, allowing Holland's Spidey to appear in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, beginning with 2016's Captain America Civil War. And you can see more on the details in our earlier Virtual Legality video from this week. But yeah, a lot of things went into this package, including, Tom Holland and Spider-Man being in the MCU. And as it turns out, Sony was paying 5% of the gross revenues on the solo Spider-Man movies to Marvel in exchange for Kevin Feige's services. After the release of this summer's Spider-Man Far From Home, Disney reportedly asked to share co-financing, while Sony wanted the financing arrangement to remain the same, the 5% gross. Unless a deal can be reached, Holland will not appear in any future MCU movies. Unless a deal can be reached. That is exactly the right way to report this. I will tell you that in my experience, people walk away from the table, walk away from negotiations all the time. It is one of the more effective strategies to try to get someone closer to your negotiated position, and is essentially an expression of your leverage at the negotiating table. Now, both Sony and Disney think they have the leverage, and that's why you see this impasse. But it's just an impasse. Maybe a deal doesn't happen. I'm not telling you a deal is guaranteed to happen. Sometimes bullheaded companies remain bullheaded all the way to the bitter end. But more likely than not, in my opinion, there is so much money, there is so much growth from the Amazing Spider-Man series to now, that Sony would be silly to give up their relationship with Disney, and Disney would be silly to give up their relationship with Spider-Man and Sony in this respect. So like I said at the end of that earlier Virtual Legality episode, I think wholeheartedly that there is every possibility that they will come together in the end with some number between 5% gross and 50% profits, and everybody will be happy. But let's see what Kevin Feige, the executive producer of basically the entire MCU, had to say. Maybe this is the quote that got IGN and others to say that Spider-Man was done. I'm feeling about Spider-Man, presumably in the question of how are you feeling about Spider-Man, gratitude and joy. We got to make 5 films within the MCU with Spider-Man, 2 standalone films and 3 with the Avengers. It was a dream that I never thought would happen. It was never meant to last forever. We knew there was a finite amount of time that we'd be able to do this, and we told the story we wanted to tell, and I'll always be thankful for that. So what you've got here is you've got Kevin Feige, and you've got him almost speaking in a kind of passive voice, right? He's talking about something that has gone, that's in the past, and he says, I really liked making those 5 Spider-Man films. I'm glad I got the chance to do it. And that's really all he says. But by putting it in that kind of past tense, a number of folks have run with it and said, hey, Kevin Feige has admitted Spider-Man's not coming back. I will sit here and tell you right now, it's not Kevin Feige's sole decision to make. Just like it wasn't Kevin Feige's sole decision to hire or fire James Gunn in any particular circumstance with respect to Guardians of the Galaxy 3. Kevin Feige is a very high-ranking, but still a member of the Disney Corporation, and so he has to answer to his bosses have to answer to the board. There's a whole lot of cooks in this particular kitchen. And Kevin Feige he sits here and says, I love Spider-Man. It was such an honor to be able to make these movies. Because as of right now, this moment, there's not a deal done. And this is the only possible way you could speak about the situation. But it doesn't mean anything for tomorrow. It certainly doesn't mean anything for next week. And nobody has any idea what next month looks like. Finally, they actually finished this article by saying what Tom Holland said on the stage at D23, where he was promoting a different Disney movie he's in. Before leaving the stage, he stopped to tell the audience, hey, everyone, it's been a crazy week, obviously. But I want you all to know from the bottom of my heart that I love you 3,000, which is a direct quote from the very popular Avengers Endgame. That he's still in his heart in the MCU, and if these corporations don't let him back, that's not really his fault. So what you've got here is an article that is essentially intended as a kind of public relations massage that Tom Holland is massaging, that Kevin Feige is massaging, maybe Disney is as well, and maybe Sony to some extent. You don't know how Sony is involved because it's D23, so they might have some ability to control some of the messaging here, but it's primarily Disney. And they're basically just trying to say, hey, we love Spider-Man, don't hate us. We love Spider-Man in Kevin Feige's specific position, we love Spider-Man so much that we went to all this effort to get him involved in these 5 movies. And I think the subtext, instead of being read as, and Spider-Man's gone and we should have a solemn wake for his loss, should be read as, look at all the people that are still invested in Spider-Man. And that in a perfect world, in a rational world, these 2 giant corporations would find a way to make it work. And I still look at this. I still look at what has been written today, the video package that has come out. I look at it and say, these corporations want to make this work. They really do. There's a lot of money on the line, and I think in all likelihood, Spider-Man will be back in the MCU. Is it possible that they will still remain irrational and butt heads and not bring Spider-Man back? Of course. These things happen. But nobody can tell the future, and it's wrong to read a headline that doesn't specifically say, essentially, we're stopping all talks and we were never going to bring Spider-Man back in any event, as IGN has done, as some others have done on my social media feed. It's wrong to depict it that way. It's wrong to go and get 9,000 retweets in that fashion. And I hope if you follow Virtual Legality, if you watch this channel, if you look at the source material like we do here, that you can at least go to your friends that are interested in Spider-Man, that are interested in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that maybe saw that IGN retweet, that maybe saw something from some other venue and said, hey, I heard it's all over. I heard Spider-Man's done in the MCU. And you can tell them either to check out this channel and this video, or just yourself, that it's far, far, far from done. And that while Spider-Man might be far from home right now, he could be returning home at any minute in the future. If you like this video, please subscribe to this channel. We're talking about all of these things all the time. Earlier this morning, in fact, I put up an interview that I had that was absolutely fantastic with 2 authors of a book called Creativity and Copyright. And they talked a lot about things that they had experienced as screenwriters and as people selling movies in Hollywood, and some of the lessons they learned with respect to intellectual property rights, that if you follow this channel, I think you'd really, really get a kick out of. It was a very special episode, so check that out. Otherwise, you can see the pictures of Spider-Man here. We've talked a lot about Spider-Man this past week. We've talked a lot about Spider-Man in the MCU in the past. So if you like this video, as I said, subscribe, share it around. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching it on YouTube, if you watched it on YouTube, or for listening to it if you listen to it on a podcast. And I will catch you on the very next episode of Virtual Legality.